Logging into our webinar, The Impact of the COVID-19 Crisis on Student Mobility from India to Germany. My name is Marie Buchte and I'm working for the GATE Germany office within DAAD. And GATE Germany is a consortium for international higher education marketing. So today we want to offer you some background information for your marketing and counseling activities regarding students from India, with a special focus on how they perceive the pandemic at the moment, how it influences their study and career plans in Germany. So I'm very happy to present you our expert today, Dr. Jayadeva. She's a social anthropologist from India who has done her master's and her PhD in the UK, where she's now research fellow at University College London. But, and this is why we invited her, Sazana has also focused on Germany within her research. She has carried out a study on student migration from India to Germany with the German Institute for Global and Area Studies, the GIGA in Hamburg. There she still is associated researcher today, and she is now a very close observer of how Indian students are reacting to the crisis at the moment. So she will take the following 30 minutes to present us her findings, and then we are very lucky to have a second expert with us today. Mr. Apoorv Mahendru will be joining us live from India, where he is Deputy Director of the DAAD's regional office in New Delhi and responsible for marketing activities. So Apoorv is actually on site in Delhi and receiving all the questions from Indian students planning to study in Germany to come here, which is why he can very well comment on Sazana's talk and tell us more about his impressions at the moment. So let me just give you some more information on the webinar procedure. The session will last 1 hour all in all, and during Sazana's talk you can already write your questions into the chat window, which you should see on the left. It would be great if you could already write your questions in English, but if not, German is also fine. I'm going to translate them. So during the Q&A session at the end, I will ask Sazana or Apoorv to answer your questions. Please also understand that we might not have time to answer every single question, and also that concerning specific issues such as visa procedures, we can only give you very general advice. The webinar will be recorded and we will publish the video on our website. In this video, neither the list of participants nor the chat window will be visible. And you will also receive the video as well as the presentation via email after this session. If you have any technical problems, please do not write that into the comment chat window, but click on the little icon on the top right-hand side of your screen. It's a little man raising his hand, so if you raise your hand using that icon, our technical support will open a private chat window with you and help you in the background. And now, I think we are all keen to start, and I welcome Dr. Jayadeva from London.
Hello.
Hello, Sazana.
Thank you so much, Marie.
Thank you, and yes, you're welcome to start your presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. So first of all, thanks to everyone who has joined us today. It's great to have you here. I'm going to be for 30 minutes discussing some of my findings from a research project that looks at the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on student mobility from India to Germany. So I'll start by giving you a little bit of background about where this research is coming from and about my methods. So between 2017 and 2018, I was a research fellow at the GIGA Institute of Asian Studies in Hamburg. And at the GIGA, I was working on a project that looked at Indian student migration to Germany. So to put it very briefly, I was looking at why Germany has become such a popular destination among Indian students, and how Indians who are interested in studying in Germany go about getting information about German universities and the application process and so on. So for this project, I conducted interviews with 41 Indians who were studying in 18 different German universities. These were some of the universities, higher education institutions that I met Indians and did interviews at. In addition, I did digital ethnographic research in study in Germany, Facebook and WhatsApp groups, as well as YouTube channels. So these are really a fascinating phenomenon that have emerged over the last 4 or 5 years. And I'm going to give you a very brief description of these groups because I think it's quite useful in understanding how I arrived at these findings. So, although an Indian who is interested in studying in Germany can find a lot of very useful information on German university websites, the website of the DAAD, and also the websites of consulates, a lot of people still find the process of understanding the German higher education system quite difficult and confusing. They also find the application process, right from shortlisting universities to getting all the documents you require for the visa, again, very complicated and stressful to understand and to negotiate. As a result, many of these Indians, despite the fact that they do find the official sources of information useful, are coming together and finding each other in mutual help Facebook and WhatsApp groups and kind of helping each other understand the German higher education system and the application process. So there are several very large Facebook groups, for example, with names like MS in Germany. So it's for all people interested in studying in Germany. These groups are quite big. You can see in this screenshot that this group has over 20,000 members. So most of these members are actually prospective students. So people who are planning to study in Germany, who are interested in studying in Germany. But there are also some people who are currently in Germany, even some recent graduates, and people use these groups to ask each other questions about the German higher education system, about the application process, the nitty-gritty of it, and also to try to understand what is life like in Germany, what is the future potentially like in Germany, are there good employment prospects? Because compared to some countries like the US and Australia, Canada, Germany is a relatively less known study destination among Indian students. So a lot of people don't really know someone who has gone to Germany and, finished their degree, got a job. So it's still a bit unknown. As a result, these groups are a good place also where people can ask, do you know if it's easy to get a job in Germany when you graduate? So it's used for asking all kinds of questions. And by asking a question in a Facebook group, you can typically get answers from lots of people, hundreds of comments every question typically receives. Now, these Facebook groups are also a gateway to an even greater amount of WhatsApp groups. So these WhatsApp groups, unlike the Facebook groups, are really specialized. So for example, there are WhatsApp groups for people interested in applying to a particular university. There are WhatsApp groups for people interested in applying for a particular course at a particular university, groups for people who are interested in understanding the visa process and working on visa applications. And all of these groups can have subgroups based on your city or state of residence in India. So it's really very specialized, and these groups are composed almost entirely of prospective students, so people who are not yet in Germany, who are in India and thinking about the application process. So just to give you a sense of how these groups look inside them, I'm sure you're familiar with how Facebook and WhatsApp work, but in the Facebook groups, because of the way the app is designed, it's possible to either post a question or respond to someone's post, whereas the WhatsApp groups enable a more chat-style conversation. And indeed, these groups, there's a constant conversation going on, a constant exchange. Almost 24/7 people are discussing the application process, discussing universities, discussing future prospects. So it's a really rich environment for someone like me, a researcher, to understand the pulse of the students. What are their concerns? What are their struggles? What kind of information are they looking for? All these groups, the Facebook groups and the WhatsApp groups, are started typically by either people who are in India and are interested in studying in Germany, so prospective students, or in some cases, Indian students who are already in Germany. So these are not an initiative of universities or any of the official organizations in Germany, but completely a sort of organic, prospective, student-led development. I find it quite helpful to show this visual to describe what exactly these groups did, because I really think, even though it was all online and nobody could actually see each other, these groups could really be seen as a co-working space, where all of these applicants in different parts of India who have never met each other before, but are united by their interest in study in Germany, can come together and help each other, and actually sometimes work on the applications together. Apart from these Facebook and WhatsApp groups, there are also a small number of YouTube channels that are started by Indians who are currently in Germany in order to help others back home understand the German higher education system and the application process. So this is an example of one of the most popular of these YouTubers. His name is Bharat, and if you look at the screenshot, you can see that he has over 178,000 subscribers, and his videos have been viewed more than 10 million times. So on YouTube channels like this, YouTubers like Bharat make videos where they tell you about how different universities work. They guide you through the application process. Bharat even takes his camera and he takes you on a campus tour. He shows you what student accommodation looks like. And YouTubers like him, I really see them as being education influencers, because the content that they produce on their channels has a huge impact on, first of all, students' decisions to come to Germany. A lot of people feel confident that this is a good place to study, that it's a safe place to study after watching channels like Bharat's. And these kind of YouTubers also have a lot of impact on how people, negotiate the application process. So as part of my research, I found these social media spaces to be a very useful research tool. So I was spending time in the Facebook groups and the WhatsApp groups and looking at the kind of questions people were asking, the kind of conversations people were having, and also looking at the kind of videos that were appearing on YouTube channels like Bharat's channel to see what were the main topics that people were interested in. So this was my past project. And now since March, when the COVID crisis became very apparent, I kind of re-entered this research project to track what is the impact of the COVID crisis on Indians who are in Germany or Indians who are interested in coming to Germany. So I had follow-up chats with some of the people whom I had interviewed in the first phase of the project. And in addition, I re-entered these Facebook groups and these WhatsApp groups, and I began to look at the kind of content that YouTubers who have study in Germany focused channels were producing to see how people are responding to the pandemic. So now I'm going to present to you what I found from that. So to give you a very brief structure of the talk, initially I'm going to be discussing the reasons behind the popularity of Germany as a study destination for Indian students. And I think this is quite important context because it will help us understand how students have been impacted by the COVID crisis. And then I'll discuss the impact of the COVID crisis on current students, recent graduates, and also prospective students and aspirants. And then I'll have a very quick conclusion. So as you must all be aware, there's been a huge increase in the number of Indians who are going to Germany for their higher education. There are currently over 20,000 Indian students in Germany, and the vast majority of these are enrolled on postgraduate engineering courses. Now, one of the findings from my project was that these Indian student flows to Germany are closely tied to the job market for engineers, both in India and in Germany. I'll explain. So, in India, families have been investing in engineering education for their children for decades. Having an engineering degree is seen as a vehicle of social mobility. It brings you a good job, a good income, a safe future. So often the feeling is that if your child is academically smart, they would obviously do engineering. So there's a huge number of people who are entering and graduating from engineering colleges every year. However, the creation of engineering jobs has not been proportionate. There are not as many jobs being created as the number of engineering graduates leaving universities every year. Furthermore, the job creation has been quite lopsided. A lot of the engineering jobs that are being created are in the field of software and IT because of India's IT boom. And there aren't many jobs being created in other engineering fields like mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, civil engineering, and so on. Therefore, apart from the graduates of the most prestigious and the most elite institutions, apart from them, the vast majority of people who graduate from an engineering college today, particularly if they're not a software engineer or an IT engineer, they really struggle to get a good job in their field. This is not to say that they are not bright or that they're not passionate about their studies. They are. They're very good students. But the problem is a larger structural problem, that there are just not enough jobs, particularly in fields outside software, to kind of absorb the huge numbers of engineers who are graduating all the time. As a result, when I did interviews with Indians who were studying in Germany, a lot of them told me that they were feeling extremely stuck in their lives. Many were unemployed. Many were working in a job that did not match their qualifications. So, for example, there were cases of somebody who had a mechanical engineering degree, but they had not been able to find a mechanical engineering job and had been forced to join a software company and become a software engineer because that was the only possible job available. So in this context of people feeling stuck, study in Germany had emerged as a very accessible path to social mobility and an accessible way to kind of get back on track. So education in Germany was seen as accessible, one, because in the last years more and more courses are being taught in English. Also, study in Germany is relatively affordable because, as you all know, even international students don't have to pay tuition fees. And finally, there was a strong feeling in India that the engineering job market was really good, and so it was a good place to study. However, very importantly, the vast majority of my interlocutors felt that the goal of a master's degree was to get a job in Germany. So this was the goal. Even though they valued the chance to study in Germany, they valued the possibility of, having an international educational experience, learning from German professors, they valued all of this. But the primary goal was to get a job in Germany. And in fact, most of the people that I interviewed said that they would not have gone to Germany for a master's if they could have instead directly got a job in Germany with their Indian bachelor's certificate. However, they felt that if they applied to German companies with just an Indian bachelor's degree, they were unlikely to get a job, and so it made sense for them to invest in doing a master's degree for some time. Almost all of them said that after they graduated, it was very important to them that they had the chance to work in Germany for some years and then decide whether they wanted to stay in Germany or to go back to India or go somewhere else. This work experience was valued almost more than the actual degree. People felt that, for example, if they were to go back to India after 5 years or something, it would be the work experience that would help them become very competitive on the job market rather than the master's degree. So while the master's degree was seen as an important credential, the really valuable credential to them was relevant work experience in their field of engineering. So now we're going to have a brief break to do 2 little polls.
Exactly. Thank you so far, Susanna. And before we come to the current situation and the pandemic, we thought, as you participants are all working in the field, working at German universities, it would be interesting to have this little poll. I can see that you're already answering. You should see the question, the first question on your screen, which is, were you aware of the existence of Study in Germany Facebook or WhatsApp groups and YouTube channels of the kind that Susanna has described in her presentation? So please vote now.
Okay.
Okay, some people are still putting in their answers, but we can see roughly 50% have been partly aware of the groups. 31% said yes, they have been aware, and 21% no. And maybe, Susanna, you could at this point already answer our first question, which is, are those social media groups only used by prospective students or also by universities?
So these groups are used only by prospective students. They're started by prospective students. The members are almost entirely prospective students, and universities really don't get involved in these groups. Some universities might have their own Facebook groups, but these groups are typically for people who have already got admission at their university. So there's a large demographic of people who haven't yet got admission, who otherwise wouldn't get support, because you start getting support once you have an admit letter. So these groups are really helpful, particularly for those who are in that space where they're applying, but they haven't really got an admission letter. Yeah, but to answer the question, all prospective students run, or sometimes Indian students in Germany have started them, but not universities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So then we could go to the next question.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just to get an overview. In which field of study do students from India mostly enroll at your university? You can just type an answer if you're able to say that. Okay, the list is getting longer and longer, but I think we can see a clear information of what you have been saying, Susanna, a clear focus on engineering. Let's see what more we have. Master of Law and Business, STEM, Big Data also, and IT, Big Data, and Business Analytics. But yeah, most of the rest is engineering. Here we also have business.
Are people still voting?
I think looks like we have all the answers.
Great. So that's really interesting, and yeah, it supports the idea that this is really an engineering student flow. Should we move on?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So now that I've given you some kind of background about why Indian students come to Germany and what their goal is, what they want to get out of a German education, I think now I can move on to what exactly is the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on, I'll start with current students. So what is the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on current students? Sorry. So the current students that I did follow-up interviews with, and also the ones that I had interviewed during the first phase of the project, all spoke about how internships and master's thesis placements were a very important route to getting a job. So as I had said earlier, getting a job was a very big goal of study in Germany, and these internships and master's thesis placements was seen as a key step to getting a job. So the students told me that what they had understood from the people in the years ahead of them was that at internships and master's thesis placements, a student had a chance to develop social networks that would be extremely useful for getting further employment. However, getting these kind of internships and master's thesis placements had always, even before COVID, been seen as very challenging. Indian students had struggled to get these kind of placements, and many of them had stories of having applied for 50 internships and getting one. So it had always been quite difficult. But post-COVID, it had become much more difficult. So a lot of the people I interviewed said that they had applied for, an internship, and the company had replied saying that they were not offering anything. They had a hiring freeze. In some cases, people had been offered an internship, but the offer had been taken back after the COVID crisis. So these internships and master's thesis placements were even harder to get now post-COVID, and this was causing a lot of stress because students felt that their goal of getting a job in Germany was being severely harmed by their inability to get these crucial work placements during their studies. As a result, they were quite worried about their future career prospects because they felt that if we're not able to get these placements now, it's going to affect us a lot, particularly if the job market is anyway not going to be good when we graduate, again because of COVID. Some of them were also having some financial problems because they had anticipated getting a certain amount of income from such internships and thesis placements, and also from other part-time jobs. A few of the people I interviewed were really lucky, and despite the COVID crisis, they did have internships and placements. However, they were extremely disappointed because their experience was not what it used to be pre-COVID. So, for example, one of the students I interviewed had a internship in a mechanical engineering company, but because of the COVID crisis, he had been told to come to work just once a week. And when he was at work, he had almost no contact with his colleagues because of social distancing. And so he felt, even though he was very lucky and he was getting paid and he officially had an internship that he could put on his CV, he was losing out on a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build these social networks that would help him get a job later. Some of the people I interviewed were had gone to India during a semester break, and then they had got stuck there because the Indian borders had closed. So they were in another kind of problematic situation. One of them that I interviewed, he said that he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how long he was going to be in India. He felt that now he should be in Germany doing a master's thesis, but he was in India and he didn't even know whether it made sense to start emailing German companies and applying for internships when he didn't even know when he would actually be able to be there to start the internship. So these were some of the major struggles of current students who were in more advanced stages of their master's degree. So for people who were in the third or fourth semester. Students who were at earlier stages of the master's degree, so like the top semesters, the first 1 or 2 semesters, they were primarily concerned with loss of a university experience. So, for example, they felt quite sad that they were having to do online learning and they missed the chance to have this international experience, be on the campus with, German professors. And they also felt that the ability to learn their courses was being somehow compromised by having to study by themselves at home. Some were also worried about whether future employers would view them as being some sort of a corona batch, meaning a group of students, a cohort of students who had not had a very rigorous education because a lot of it had been online. And so they worried that future employers might discriminate a bit against them, feeling that other cohorts might be more well-trained academically. So that was the impact that I found on current students. Now let's move on to what the impact was on recent graduates. So as you can imagine, these recent graduates had entered a really bad job market. They had just graduated and many of them had already received information from companies that there were hiring freezes, and some people had submitted applications and got an automated reply that we will not be processing anything at this stage. So a lot of these students, they had anticipated, based on what they had heard from people in the years ahead of them, that getting a job in Germany took anywhere between a few months to a year. And this was pre-COVID. And now with the additional disruptions caused by COVID, they were very worried that they would have to have an extremely long period of job search, and therefore also very expensive, just looking for a job without having a proper source of income. Many were also worried that the 18 months that every recent graduate of a German university gets to look for a job would no longer be enough for them to actually successfully find a job because of the COVID job market. Nevertheless, despite the fact that they were struggling with getting jobs and they were worried that this would be a long and difficult process to get a job, nobody was really planning to kind of go back to India and forget about their plans. Because as I've already described, there was a feeling that if you go back to India with just a degree from a German university, this won't really help you to get a job. What will really help you to get a job in India or anywhere else is relevant work experience at a German university. So as a result, even though they were stressed and worried about the possibility of getting a job in Germany, all of them were bracing for a long and difficult job search rather than thinking of going back to India immediately. Very interestingly, both among the recent graduates and among the current students, very few of them had any health-related concerns about the COVID crisis. Most people felt that they were very safe in Germany, that Germany was managing everything very well. Many people said, the German government is taking care of us. In some cities, the Indian students I interviewed also said that the German students' associations were quite active and were also providing support. So nobody felt nervous about the actual coronavirus situation, and nobody really was worried of their health and wanted to go home. There's a hashtag called Indians Stuck in Germany. I'm not sure if any of you have heard about it. It was a sort of social media movement started by a small number of Indians in Germany, some of them students, who were requesting the Indian government to repatriate them because they felt it was quite problematic to be outside India during a pandemic. But none of the people that I interviewed was part of this movement, and in fact some of them said that, oh, this movement doesn't really make sense because we're all fine. There were really very few health-related concerns. Now moving on to the final category. What is the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on prospective students? So again, there were very little health-related concerns about the COVID crisis. Only I think in March, I saw in the WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups some people saying, is it safe to travel to Germany during a pandemic? But already by April, nobody was really worried about health-related dangers of traveling during a pandemic. Some people said their parents were worried, but mostly this was not a major concern. There was also a feeling that Germany was managing everything very well and that perhaps Germany was managing it much better than India even. The main anxiety for prospective students, again, was anxiety about the job market. So people were worried, is there going to be a recession? And if there's going to be a recession, how long will it last? Will it be going on at the time that I graduate? What impact will it have on my job opportunities after I graduate? What impact will it have in the shorter term on my ability to get internships and work placements, which even these prospective students, through hearing what the people in the years ahead of them had said, they also felt that, you have to get an internship in order to get a job after you graduate. So they were worried about their longer-term career prospects, the shorter-term prospects of getting internships that would help them get these jobs. Many were also worried that maybe if there's a recession, will German companies start to give a preference to German nationals, and will international students suffer particularly? There were some concerns about online learning also, so people were a bit worried that it's a bit sad to go all the way to Germany and have online learning. But what's really interesting was, while this was quite a big concern in March, by the time it was April and May, it had become kind of normalized, this idea of having online courses. And people weren't really worried about it anymore. They were kind of, they were not thrilled at the idea of online courses, but people weren't saying, does it make sense to go to Germany when courses will be taught online? It had become kind of normalized. So this is just a screenshot of a question in a Facebook group, just to give you a flavor of students' concerns about the job market. So this student writes in a Facebook group, considering the economic situation due to Corona, is it worth or safe planning to go for winter 2020 or summer 2021 from India? Will the full-time, part-time, and other opportunities be the same, meaning good, as before Corona in Germany? So these kind of conversations were constantly happening, always quite job-related. However, despite this significant anxiety about the future job market, most of the prospective students did not appear to be rethinking their plan to study in Germany at all. And this was because many of them felt that they didn't have other options. Some had already resigned from their jobs. Some felt that they were stuck in jobs that were not really the jobs they wanted to do. So, for example, a civil engineer who was working in a software company. Some were unemployed. Some were in the final year of a degree and were anticipating that the job market they would enter would be even worse than normal. And all of these categories of people were worried about a long period of inactivity and stagnation in India. Some even felt that, it would be too late to do a master's degree if one didn't go soon because they were getting too old. Alongside this, there was also a feeling that Germany was handling the pandemic well and the economy was so good that it would be able to bounce back from a recession better than many other countries. Some students even felt that a master's degree might be a good option in a time of recession because you can kind of upskill and get the kind of skills that are needed in a job market, and then you can be more competitive. So these are just some more screenshots to kind of represent how these questions about recession and questions about the job market were a big theme in the Facebook and WhatsApp groups. Another reason why prospective students were not giving up their plans to study in Germany was because they felt that in the future it would be even much harder to come to Germany for study. For example, people were worried that the competition the next year would be extreme. Some people said that the German universities had more selective admission criteria every year. And so if they didn't go this year, it would be very difficult to go in the future maybe because the admission criteria would be more selective. There was also a feeling that a lot of people might defer their admission, and so the next year there might be a huge glut of applicants and it would be even more competitive. Some people also worried that because of a recession, the German government might put a cap on the number of international students who could come to Germany, which would again make it very difficult. There were similarly fears that because of the recession, the government might even reintroduce tuition fees for international students or make the visa rules more strict. And for all these reasons, students felt that it's not worth putting off our plans. Let's just go to Germany now. The Indian YouTubers were also, who were really like educational influencers, were also strongly encouraging students to keep coming to Germany. They were not telling them it's too risky, don't come. They were instead saying come, and they were also giving them a lot of advice on how to manage the COVID situation, and also through their videos kind of giving the impression that Germany was handling the COVID situation quite well. So while some people who had the possibility to defer by one term were doing this, the vast majority were keeping going with their plans. And in fact, in the groups, people were not really discussing should we go or should we not go, but they were discussing immediate bureaucratic problems they were struggling with. For example, getting transcripts and degree certificates. People had all kinds of visa problems. some people who had visas, their visas were likely to expire before they could even leave India, and they were concerned, about whether they would be able to apply for an extension or whether they would have to reapply. So these were the kind of problems that people were discussing. Also, whether it's possible to enroll online without a visa. So it was mainly these immediate bureaucratic problems and struggles that people were discussing, rather than the question of should we go to Germany or should we not. Travel was another big topic that people were discussing. Can we travel? What are the travel restrictions? Yeah, so in sum, just to conclude, among the prospective students, the main concerns were these immediate problems and these immediate struggles that the COVID crisis had created. And these groups were a very useful place in which people were exchanging information with each other, about visa processing, delays, travel, how to organize it. So these were the exchanges rather than the question of should we go to Germany. And in all of these, the social media communities were very valuable. Even before COVID, the application process had always been experienced as very uncertain and very difficult, and now it was much worse. And these mutual support groups were therefore a very important space where people could get information and guidance about the immediate struggles and problems which were quite significant that they were facing, and also discuss their more longer-term concerns and fears with people in the same boat, and finally get confidence seeing that there were other people in the same boat. So this was always, these social media groups were always important, and now much more so. So very quickly to conclude, as I've said, to summarize, the goal of getting a master's degree in Germany was to get a job in Germany. And work placement during the master's degree was seen as crucial for getting a job. As a result, there was lots of anxiety among prospective students, current students, and recent graduates about the job market. However, many prospective students were not rethinking their study plans. This was because many of them felt they didn't have good alternatives, and also because Germany was quite an affordable education destination, it wasn't seen as very risky. This is compared to the US, where the education influencers in the US were strongly advising the people who watch their channels to not come to the US this year. They were saying it's too risky given the financial investment you're making. Whereas in Germany, since it was a more affordable education, it was not seen as risky. And finally, to conclude, the study in Germany, Facebook and WhatsApp groups, as well as YouTube channels, as I've described, were playing a key role in navigating all of these disruptions caused by COVID. So that's it. I'll end here. So we have
Thank you, Sazana, for your presentation.
some time for questions. Thank you so much.
So now we will try to reach Apoorv Mahendru from DAAD New Delhi. He has had bad internet connection this morning, but we will try. There he is. Hello, Apoorv.
Yeah, it's great. Hi, very good morning to everyone. It's already afternoon for me, but I believe most of you are logging in from Germany, or from Europe somewhere. I guess Sazana is not in Germany right now. So if you can hear me properly, I'll just maybe take the next 5 minutes. I'll really not talk much. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation either. So I would just maybe like to pick up on some of the points that Sazana has already raised in her very interesting and very insightful presentation. I think to start off with, I can already say that what we have been seeing on ground is pretty similar to what Sazana has summated in these 30-odd slides, with a little bit of differences here and there, but nothing very meaningfully different. What is most important, I think, what was said is that in these times of uncertainty, I think students, Indian students, are very much aware of this uncertainty which is prevailing, not just when it comes to opportunities of studying abroad, whether it is Germany, whether it is USA, Canada. I mean, that is one thing, even within India. And I think that's the interesting bit. There has been a lot of uncertainty. A lot of students were not actually even through with their school examinations or the university examinations when the pandemic broke out. And as a result, their academic results and transcripts, everything is actually even till today pretty much on hold, and uncertainty as to how will I be graded, and these are very basic concerns and uncertainties that are prevailing that are causing a lot of worry to Indian students. I think, as Sazana rightly mentioned, health has not been a concern. So even though the coronavirus is a health-induced pandemic, none of the people that we encountered also in our day-to-day counseling sessions, obviously we are not able to do them face-to-face, but through our emails or the various webinars or interactive sessions that we do, none of them has pointed to that being an issue. And I think that is because Germany has, as was mentioned, really dealt with the pandemic in a very successful fashion, led by example. So that's definitely not a concern at all. Another thing that I'd like to say is that nonetheless, I mean, although I know that, students are not really wary of going to Germany. In fact, I think for most of the students who were eyeing Germany as a destination, they haven't really changed their mind because of the pandemic. I think the reason that many students will not be able to join your universities has more to do with what, again, Sazana had mentioned earlier, the bureaucratic or the technical issues with students not having their transcripts and grades in place. With the visa offices, most of the missions from most countries are actually not functioning. So in a country like India, where visa processing and getting visa slots or interview slots is in a general case already very, very difficult, this situation has made it even worse because the last 3 months practically everything's on a standstill. And even assuming in a best case scenario that the visa processing begins in a couple of weeks from today, the fear that most students have is that they will not get a slot and they will not have these things in place on time. So it's more to do with such technical issues. I think the flights are not operating. Another very interesting and I think meaningful thing is that a lot of Indian students, maybe not so much for Germany, but definitely for many other international destinations, they also rely on student loans from banks and the likes. So getting students loans sanctioned from banks is also a very tedious and long-drawn process, which also requires the students to provide certain things like a valid visa and all those kinds of things. So a lot of that has just not happened, and I think that is more the reason why we are going to see a dip, unfortunately. Sazana mentioned that there are more than 20,000 students, Indian students in Germany as of now, and unfortunately I do see that there is going to be a dip, but I think the positive signal that we can still take from here is that the dip is not induced by a loss of interest, but rather to the contrary, just because of the current difficult administrative situation that we find ourselves in. So that's a very important key point. Unlike many other countries, where it was mentioned that people are not opting for the countries because they feel that they're not safe or things are not being handled properly, or in many cases, I think whether you're looking at Australia or Canada, US, it is also a very big investment. I'm not to say that coming to Germany is no investment at all. Yeah, from an Indian perspective, it is still a large investment, but proportionally speaking, it is definitely less than what most students heading to those destinations will say. And I think therefore, some of you may have read some studies and some statistics, whether they are by the international QS rankings or whether they are by the Indian portals like shiksha.com, all of them referring to either 48% students have said that they will not go or they will change their mind, or 30% have said this or that. I think internationally speaking, on an average, these might hold true, but in case for Germany, I would say that the number of people who are considering dropping coming to Germany because of the corona pandemic is surely not going to be 48 or 30. It is going to be lesser. In our opinion, what we've been seeing, and Sazana rightly mentioned, especially for the large majority that comes to Germany for STEM-related subjects. We saw earlier in the poll that STEM, science and engineering, basically is the recruitment ground for most universities here. In those fields especially, I think a lot of them are enrolling at a master's level. So there will unfortunately be a dip, because the master's itself is also a short-term program. It is, many times not even a full two-year program. Generally, even the 2 years means the last bit is anyhow, it's like an internship or a project. So the university experience is going to get lost for many of them who are considering masters. But since Germany is also very interesting and attractive for a lot of students from India who are going to PhDs, I think they are likely to be less impacted. So that's another feel and take home that kind of we are looking at. One thing that, Sazana, you had mentioned is that a lot of people that you interviewed were a little anxious about job opportunities and career prospects. That's something we haven't seen as much. Yeah, there are surely always some who mention these points, but surprisingly, most of the people that we have been interacting with, our offices have been doing, 2 or 3 question-answer sessions, online sessions, because we can't have face-to-face counseling sessions anymore, with always groups of 50 to 100 students joining for each of these sessions. So we hardly ever get the question where they're talking about job prospects. I think most of the times the concerns are, as we mentioned earlier, rather administrative. So I think these are the main points that I just wanted to highlight, but also coming back, since we are DAAD, we're not just looking at students and recruitment, but we are also a scholarship body. So we've had, of course, also seen an impact in that. In our scholarships, we have seen an impact, and that in turn might impact admissions, of course, partially to the universities. Most of these summer courses that we had, short-time summer programs, summer courses, internship programs, as you had also mentioned, Susanna, they have been impacted. We had to actually cancel off some of our short-term programs, which happen usually during the summer months. So that has definitely, impacted our actions here. But I think most of our long-term programs, our PhD programs, our cooperation programs, we are going ahead. The funding is still available. The applications and the interest that we see from the academic partners as well from individuals who are looking at these, those seem to be in place. And I think the reason for that is also what you said. Initially, March, April were phases where there was far more uncertainty than now. I mean, now over time, one has already seen that the graph in Germany, the COVID graph is kind of, leveling, coming down, and there is now a certain, safety with which you can go ahead and plan ahead. So that's happening. I believe that even though it will be impacted, it will hopefully not be as bad as in many other countries, international recipient countries. And if we're able to address some of the administrative issues maybe a little more proactively than bureaucracy generally does, then we might actually see an even smaller dip. So I think if I say anything else, it will be a repetition of what Susanna has already mentioned, so I'll limit myself to these comments, but I would be happy to answer the questions that attendees may have. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you so much, Apoorv. So yes, we have some questions indeed. Maybe the first one to both of you. What are your recommendations for universities here in Germany to actively overcome the students' uncertainty?
Yeah, sure. I think first of all, what the students will expect from the universities is support. And support again when it comes to getting appointments for visas or anything similar to that. So if you can somehow reassure your students that you will stand behind them and you will do whatever possible from your part, I think that's going to be a big reassurance, because even in a normal case, that is generally when students are, at a loss that they approach the university. So I don't think that you have to reassure them too much about the health hazards per se. Maybe if you could talk about the, whether or not, how much of it is going to be online and how much is it going to be on site. If you have an answer to this, because that's a query that I think many students are anxious about, that's another thing that would probably help them and reassure them.
Yeah. True. And to add to what Apoorv said, I think that for some students, they know theoretically that, okay, it could be part online, part offline, but maybe even more detail about what this actually would look like. How would it actually translate? What would an average day or week look like? So maybe if it could be made a bit more concrete, what these new forms of education would be like from a student perspective. The other thing that I can say that universities could think about doing is that in the WhatsApp groups that I was studying, a lot of people had got an admission letter from their dream university. But in some cases, universities were not permitting online enrollment unless a student already had a stamped visa. So some universities were permitting it and some universities weren't. And so maybe if it's possible, given these extreme circumstances, to have a little bit more of lenience in that regard. I don't know how much power universities have at all over deciding the rules. But I did come across quite a few students who had an admission letter but couldn't do the online enrollment.
Are there any plans to reopen the embassy now that students are supposed to be allowed to travel again starting on July 1st? I don't know if you, Apoorv, can say anything about that.
Yeah, I cannot really say anything with certainty. You know, it's always been kind of, the date has been shifted back and back and back. Currently, I think the situation in India hasn't really improved in terms of the pandemic. In India is actually getting worse, unfortunately. So the reason that most of the missions has shut down and were not giving visas is not so much because the situation in Germany was bad, but of course more so that they have to deal with persons here. And that was a major concern. That situation, unfortunately, hasn't really improved. But as I said, to the contrary, it is still aggravated. But again, there have been indications from some countries that they might, maybe towards the middle of July, reconsider. But I think it's premature to really comment whether that will happen or not. It all really depends on how the figures are going to develop. If it, you know, goes up much higher, I think it might be further delayed, so it's very, very hard to judge that.
Yeah. Susanna, in your presentation, you described students self-organizing and ways of self-organizing. How would you assess the role of agencies in this process? I guess this is what is meant, yeah.
Do you mean education consultancies? I think they must mean education consultancies. So I guess that education consultancies in India, when it comes to study in Germany particularly, have been seen a little suspiciously by students because, as you must know, education consultancies often partner with universities in countries like the UK and Australia and the US, and they get a commission for every student that they successfully recruit for the university. So they have a lot of incentive to recommend their partner universities to students. But obviously, since German universities, at least the public universities, are free, none of the universities on the list of participants today actually partners with consultancies. And so a lot of the people I interviewed said that consultancies actually were actively discouraging them from considering Germany and recommending the US or Australia or a partner country. And so students felt that you couldn't really trust consultancies when it came to Germany. Having said that, I think that some students still were also going to a consultant, but also verifying what the consultant said in the WhatsApp group because they didn't know if they can fully trust the consultant. So to sum up, I would say that compared to countries like the US and Australia, consultants might be playing a slightly less significant role in Germany.
Maybe I could add to that, and by adding actually also ask a question to Susanna. What I have actually seen sometimes is that these Facebook groups, I'm not talking of WhatsApp groups, but some of the Facebook groups for sure, I have the feeling many a times they are run by agencies. I've come across quite a few which have significant numbers of followers. So the ones that you showed, obviously I know some of those, they're definitely student run, but have you also come across ones which are run by agencies and which do have a large following? Because there the things may be a little different.
Yeah. I've come across some that were run by agencies, but they didn't really operate in this kind of collaborative, supportive way between members. There would also be occasions when education consultants would try to enter these student groups. And then someone would say, hey, remove this person, he's a consultant. And then the admin would remove the consultant. So sometimes the consultants were trying to come and recruit clients through these groups because it's a very conveniently assembled market in a way. But yeah, so Apoorv is right that there are some Facebook groups started by consultants, but I didn't really feel that these groups were very active in the sense of members sharing information. Rather, it would maybe be just a consultant.
It's already 12 German time, but I think we can take 3 more minutes. In your opinion, how can student associations, and I guess we mean German student associations, reach Indian students, possibly even before coming to Germany, and give advice on life in Germany and organizing their stay here?
Can I start? Please go ahead. Susanna, you go ahead. Ladies first. I'm old-fashioned.
So I think that, yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead, Apoorv. Well, I think that some students' associations are actually doing this already. So in some of the WhatsApp groups, I've seen representatives of Indian Students' Associations adding a message in the group saying that I'm a member of, for example, Munich India Students Association, and we are doing a webinar for prospective students. Everyone is welcome to come. So I think that the Indian Students Associations are actually, they have a good sense of how these groups operate. They have their own WhatsApp groups, and they are to some extent already doing this.
This would actually be the time when we start offering pre-departure webinars and pre-departure sessions to prospective or students who are going to be enrolling in the winter semester for Germany. Obviously, this year looks a little different. So generally, we would have these sessions where we would then invite student associations. In fact, there is an association of Indian student associations, and their details can also be found on the website of the DAAD India. And we would generally have multiple sessions wherein the associations, whether it's Dresden or Heidelberg or Hanover or wherever they may be, Magdeburg, they would then come and speak to a general crowd of prospective outgoing students about how things are. And we're planning to do the same with, of course, this year not really giving too much of pre-departure tips, but I think more importantly, as the question also mentioned, to just give them more of a feel how student life on campus is really playing out currently given this pandemic scenario.
Okay,
the question was about
thank you.
And how they can support all of this.
I see that there was a clarification, and they meant the German Studentenwerke rather than the Indian Student Association when they asked. So I mean, just to very quickly, in a second, answer that question, I think one of the options would even be to have a representative from the German Studentenwerke, perhaps do a Q&A with one of the YouTubers where they can, in a live session, answer a lot of questions, because when one of these YouTubers does a live session, there are thousands of people who come. So that's a very quick way to do a Q&A, or maybe even starting their own YouTube channels is good, because I think the medium of video is very useful in making this somehow foreign land, which no one has ever been to, and no one even knows anyone who's been there and studied there, to kind of make it more legible.
Make
I
our
think
platforms
video
available.
is often a very
if the
nice
student
medium.
back
So,
would like to get in touch with us, we'd be happy to think of something. So just feel free.
Okay, great. Thank you so much to both of you. And I think if you, dear participants, have more questions, you're also welcome to contact our experts after this webinar. You can find Susanna's address here, and you can find Apoorv on the DAAD New Delhi's website. And if you're interested in learning more about India, German-Indian relationships in science and research cooperation, we can just recommend you to join the DAAD Netzwerk Conference, the network conference organized by the DAAD in September online. The conference will go on throughout the whole of September with different presentations, different live events. So you can join the conference. Registrations should be open by the end of July, and we will give you the link on the conference platform in the chat window. So far from us, I say thank you again to our experts. Thank you to the participants for listening and staying with us the whole hour. And see you next time for the next GATE Germany webinar. Bye.